A dog begged strangers at the gas station, but only one man followed her, and what he found made him break down in tears. At first it seemed like just a stray searching for food. But when she led him behind the pumps, he stumbled into something far darker than he could imagine. Locked doors, hidden markings, a secret no one was supposed to see. This wasn't just a lost dog. It was a desperate cry for help. And the deeper he followed, the more dangerous it became. What was she running from? What hidden world had he uncovered? And when the truth finally came to light, would he have the strength to save her? Or lose everything trying? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered asphalt of Highway 18. Harlan Voss eased his wrecker into the small gas station, the familiar screech of worn brakes cutting through the quiet autumn air. His broad shoulders slumped with exhaustion as he climbed down from the cab, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. 3 days on the road had left him bone-tired, the kind of weariness that settled deep in your muscles and wouldn't let go. The station was one of those older places that had somehow survived the march of progress. A simple rectangular building with faded blue trim and only 4 pumps out front. A bell chimed somewhere inside as other customers came and went, but Harlan barely noticed. His focus was on getting fuel, maybe grabbing some coffee, and getting back on the road. As he began filling up the wrecker's tank, movement caught his eye. A dog was weaving between the pumps, approaching different customers with a cautious hope that made something twist in Harlan's chest. She was a shepherd mix of some kind, her coat so caked with dried mud that its true color was impossible to determine. But it was her eyes that made him pause. Intelligent amber eyes that seemed to carry a weight beyond simple animal hunger. The dog approached an elderly couple by the next pump over. The woman drew back, clutching her purse closer, while her husband made shooing motions with his hands. "Get on now, get!" he called out gruffly. The dog backed away, head lowered but dignity somehow intact. Harlan found himself reaching into his jacket pocket, where he always kept a few strips of beef jerky for long hauls. "Here, girl," he called softly, holding out a piece. Those amber eyes fixed on him, assessing. She took a few tentative steps forward, nose working overtime. There was something about the way she moved, careful but not cowering, as if she'd known both kindness and cruelty and wasn't sure which to expect. As she drew closer, Harlan could see she was thin beneath the mud, ribs visible through her coat. But there was muscle there, too, speaking to a strength that hardship hadn't quite beaten out of her. She accepted the jerky delicately from his fingers, backing up a few steps to eat it. Harlan noticed something else then, a crude tattoo in her ear, the numbers Y12, stark against pink skin. That wasn't the kind of marking you'd see on a regular pet. Something about it raised the hairs on the back of his neck. "You got a home somewhere, girl?" he asked quietly, though he was pretty sure he knew the answer. The dog finished the jerky and looked up at him. Then, to his surprise, she glanced over her shoulder, toward the edge of the station's property where scrubby grass gave way to dense woods. She looked back at him, took a few steps in that direction, then stopped and turned again. Harlan had spent enough time around working dogs to recognize an invitation when he saw one. The sensible thing would be to finish filling up his tank, get his coffee, and get back on the road. He had deadlines to meet, and whatever was going on with this dog wasn't his problem. But those eyes held him. There was an urgency in them that he couldn't shake, a silent plea that spoke to something deep in his soul. With a sigh that was half resignation and half curiosity, he replaced the fuel nozzle and secured his truck. "All right then, he said, reaching for another piece of jerky. "Show me what's so important." The dog's entire demeanor changed. Her ears perked forward and her tail gave a single wave. She waited until he took a step in her direction, before turning and trotting toward the tree line, pausing every few yards to make sure he was still following. The late afternoon light was taking on that golden quality that photographers call magic hour, but there was nothing magical about the unease growing in Harlan's gut. The dog led him past a rusted-out dumpster and through a gap in the chain-link fence that marked the station's boundary. The ground sloped down here, and his boots slipped slightly on dead leaves and loose dirt. They'd gone about 50 yards into the woods when the dog stopped, looking back at him with an intensity that made him pause. The sounds of the highway had faded to a distant hum, replaced by the rustle of wind through nearly bare branches and the occasional call of a crow. "What is it, girl?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper, though he couldn't have said why. The dog moved forward more slowly now, leading him around a thick stand of oak trees. As they cleared the trees, Harlan saw what had brought them here, and his breath caught in his throat. Hidden in a shallow depression was an old pickup truck, its once red paint now a patchwork of rust and fading. But it wasn't the truck itself that made his heart rate spike. It was the metal cages stacked in its bed, partially covered by a torn tarp that flapped weakly in the breeze. Moving closer, careful to keep his movements slow and quiet, Harlan could make out more details. The cages were the heavy-duty kind used for large dogs, but they were smaller than they should be for their purpose. Too small for an animal to do more than turn around. There were water bowls attached to some of them, bone dry and crusted with what might have been blood. The dog, his companion, stood rigid beside him, her eyes fixed on the truck. A low growl rumbled in her chest, so quiet he felt it more than heard it. That ear tattoo made horrible sense now. This wasn't just about one stray dog. This was something much darker. A branch snapped somewhere behind them. The dog's head whipped around, ears forward, every muscle tensed. Harlan turned more slowly, years of military training kicking in as he scanned the woods. The shadows between the trees had deepened, and the golden light that had seemed so peaceful minutes ago now felt like nature's warning signal. "Time to go," he muttered, touching the dog's shoulder lightly. She didn't need to be told twice. They moved back toward the station, faster than they'd come but trying to stay quiet. Harlan's mind was racing. He needed to call the authorities, but something told him this wasn't as simple as calling the local police. That truck hadn't been abandoned. It was hidden, waiting. For what? He didn't want to imagine. They were almost back to the fence when voices drifted through the trees, rough male voices coming from the direction of the truck. The dog froze, then pressed against Harlan's leg, trembling but silent. He could feel the rapid beat of her heart through her fur. Moving as one, they slipped through the fence gap and made their way back to the station's lot. Only when they reached Harlan's wrecker did he let out the breath he'd been holding. The dog stayed close, her body still tense, gaze fixed on the woods they'd just left. Harlan looked down at her. This brave, damaged creature who'd trusted him enough to show him something that could get them both killed. He couldn't walk away now. Whatever was going on here, whatever darkness they'd stumbled into, he was involved whether he liked it or not. "Well," he said softly, opening the passenger door of his truck. "Looks like you've got yourself a ride, if you want it." The dog looked at the open door, then at him, then back at the door. Without hesitation, she jumped up into the cab, turning once before settling on the worn seat. As Harlan walked around to the driver's side, he caught movement at the edge of the woods. 2 men had emerged and were standing by the dumpster, scanning the lot. Even from this distance, there was something predatory in their stance that made his skin crawl. He climbed into the cab as naturally as he could, starting the engine with steady hands that belied the adrenaline coursing through his system. The dog pressed closer to him as he pulled out of the station, neither of them relaxing until Highway 18 had carried them far from those watching eyes. "You need a name," he told his new companion as mile markers flashed past. "Can't just keep calling you girl." She looked at him with those knowing amber eyes, and he found himself smiling despite the danger they'd left behind. "How about Juniper? Seems like you're as tough as those old trees back there." The newly named Juniper laid her head on his leg, and Harlan felt the weight of responsibility settle over him like a familiar coat. Whatever came next, they were in it together now. The shepherd mix moved with purpose now, her mud-caked paws leaving clear tracks in the gravel as she led Harlan away from the gas station. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty road, turning everything golden and hushed. Every few steps, she would look back at him, those amber eyes seeming to ask, "Are you still with me?" Harlan followed, his work boots crunching steadily on the rough ground. 20 years of towing broken-down vehicles had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every one of them was on high alert. The dog wasn't just wandering, she was taking him somewhere specific. After about 15 minutes of walking, they came to a chain-link fence surrounding an abandoned limestone yard. The metal was rusted, with gaps where the links had given way to time and weather. The dog slipped through one of these openings easily, then waited on the other side, watching him expectantly. "All right then," Harlan muttered, pushing aside the loose fencing. The yard was a graveyard of old equipment, crushers and conveyor belts frozen in their final positions, covered in creeping vines and bird droppings. The main building's windows were boarded up, dark rectangles against weathered gray walls. But the dog wasn't interested in the main building. She trotted toward a smaller structure off to the side, a maintenance shed with corrugated metal walls that had once been painted green. The door hung crooked on its hinges, padlocked but with enough gap at the bottom for a determined animal to squeeze through. The lock was old, its mechanisms gummed up with rust. Harlan pulled the multi-tool from his jacket pocket, the same one he used for stubborn tow hooks and jammed winches. After a minute of careful manipulation, the lock clicked open. The smell hit him first, metallic and organic, the unmistakable scent of blood mixed with fear. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness inside. Metal cages lined the walls, most empty but some still bearing dark stains that told their own stories. A trail of dried blood led from one cage to a drain in the concrete floor. "Jesus," he breathed, taking in the scene. This wasn't some makeshift operation. The cages were professional grade, each with its own water system and feeding station. A desk in the corner held neat stacks of paperwork and a ledger bound in black leather. Harlan approached the desk, conscious of the dog watching him intently. The ledger's pages were filled with neat columns of numbers and codes. One entry caught his eye. Y12, transferred. He looked at the dog, at the tattoo visible in her ear when she tilted her head. "That's you, isn't it, girl?" She whined then, not in response to his words, but at something else. Moving to the drain she was focused on, Harlan could hear it. Tiny sounds coming from below. He got down on his knees, pulling out his phone to use as a flashlight. 2 pairs of eyes reflected the light back at him, accompanied by weak whimpers. Puppies, maybe a few weeks old, huddled together in the drainage pipe. They must have followed their mother's scent here, only to become trapped. "Okay," Harlan said, more to himself than the anxious mother beside him. "Okay, we can do this." He studied the drain cover, heavy iron, but held in place by only 4 rusted bolts. The multi-tool came out again, this time working on the corroded metal. His hands were steady, but his heart was pounding. How long had these pups been down there? How long had their mother been searching for help, approaching stranger after stranger until she found someone who would follow? The last bolt finally gave way, and Harlan lifted the grate carefully. The puppies were just out of reach, but they responded to their mother's encouraging whines, inching closer to the light. They were thin but alive, their fur matted with grime from the drain. Harlan laid flat on his stomach, stretching his arm into the pipe. His fingers brushed against warm fur, and he managed to get a gentle grip on the first pup. It didn't struggle as he lifted it out, placing it carefully on the concrete, where its mother immediately began cleaning it with desperate thoroughness. The second pup was harder to reach, having backed away in fear. Harlan spoke softly, continuously, the way he used to talk to scared animals on his grandfather's farm. "Come on, little one. Your mama's waiting. That's it. Just a little closer." Finally, his fingers closed around the second puppy. As he lifted it free, the mother dog's whole body seemed to vibrate with joy and relief. She gathered both pups close, licking them frantically, checking every inch of them as they squeaked and squirmed under her attention. Harlan sat back against the wall, watching the reunion through vision that had gone surprisingly blurry. Something hot and wet rolled down his cheek, and he realized he was crying, really crying, for the first time since Sarah's funeral 3 years ago. The tears came silently but steadily now, releasing something that had been locked away inside him for too long. He watched through them as the mother dog nursed her babies, her whole body curved around them protectively, and felt his chest ache with emotions he couldn't name. These weren't tears of sadness, exactly. They were something else. Relief, maybe? Or recognition of something pure and good in a world that often seemed to lack both. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across his weathered face. The mother dog looked up at him then, her amber eyes full of trust and gratitude. She didn't move from her pups, but her tail thumped once against the concrete floor. The simple gesture of acknowledgement broke something open in Harlan's heart. Some wall he'd built up over years of lonely highways and empty nights. He sat there for a long while, letting the tears come as they needed to, watching this small family reunite in the gathering darkness of the shed. His hands, calloused from years of working with chains and metal, itched to reach out and touch them, to confirm their reality. But he held back, giving them this moment of peace. The pups were sleeping now, milk-drunk and safe against their mother's warm belly. She hadn't taken her eyes off them, but her posture had relaxed slightly, the desperate edge of her earlier movements smoothing into contentment. Harlan cleared his throat, surprised by how rough his voice sounded. "We can't leave you here," he said softly. "Whatever this place is, whatever they were doing to you, it's over now. You hear me? It's over." The words felt like a promise, not just to the dogs, but to himself. Something had shifted in him, some long dormant part of his soul awakening to the simple truth before him. Sometimes helping others meant helping yourself too. He sat there a while longer, letting the mother dog, Juniper, he decided then, thinking of the tough little trees that grew in the harshest places, care for her pups. His tears had dried, leaving him feeling oddly lighter, as if some long-carried burden had finally begun to lift from his shoulders. The drive to Birchfield Veterinary was tense, with Harlan constantly checking his rearview mirror. Juniper lay curled in the passenger footwell of his wrecker, her 2 pups nestled safely against her. Every few minutes, her amber eyes would meet his, filled with a trust that made his chest tight. The clinic's parking lot was empty except for 2 cars when he pulled in, the gravel crunching under his heavy tires. The open sign still glowed in the window, though the sun was setting. Harlan gathered the small family carefully, using his jacket as a makeshift carrier. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and pet shampoo, with walls covered in pet health posters and photos of happy animals with their owners. A slim woman in blue scrubs looked up from behind the reception desk, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "We're about to close, but," she began, then noticed the bundle in Harlan's arms. Her expression shifted instantly from polite to focused. "Bring them straight back." She led him through a door marked Examination Room 1, her movements quick but controlled. "I'm Delaney Whitlow, vet tech here. What happened?" Harlan placed his jacket gently on the metal examination table. "Found them in an abandoned limestone yard. Pups were trapped in a drain. The mother, she led me there." Delaney's hands were already moving, checking vital signs with practiced efficiency. "Smart girl," she murmured to Juniper, who allowed the examination with wary patience. "How long? Were the puppies in the drain?" "Don't know, but there's something else." Harlan pointed to Juniper's ear. "She's got a tattoo, Y12, and I found some things at that yard. Cages, blood, a ledger with the same code." Delaney's hands paused for just a moment. Something flickered across her face. Recognition? Concern? But she continued her examination, speaking in a lower voice. "The puppies are dehydrated but stable. Mom's undernourished but otherwise healthy. Though these scars..." She traced gentle fingers over healed wounds on Juniper's flank. The clinic's back door opened and closed. Footsteps approached, accompanied by a confident voice. "Delaney? I saw lights still on. Ah, we have patients." Dr. Mercer Quaid entered the room with the easy authority of someone used to commanding attention. Tall and well-groomed, he wore his white coat like armor, his smile practiced and reassuring. But something in that smile didn't quite reach his eyes when they settled on Juniper. "Well, what do we have here?" Quaid moved closer, reviewing Delaney's preliminary notes. "Excellent work as always, Delaney. And you are..." He turned to Harlan. "Harlan Voss. Found them out by the old Palmer yard. A good Samaritan. We need more people willing to step up like that." Quaid's praise felt rehearsed, like lines from a commercial. He examined Juniper's ear tattoo, his expression unchanged. "Ah, yes. This one's actually a known case. She's supposed to be in county custody." Harlan's shoulders tensed. Custody? She was locked in a shed with her pups in a drain. "These situations can be complicated," Quaid said smoothly. "The county has protocols for handling strays, especially ones with behavioral issues. I'm sure they'll be grateful we found her. I can make the calls right now to have animal control pick them up." "Behavioral issues?" Harlan's voice was quiet but firm. "She led me to her pups. Let me help them. Hasn't shown a hint of aggression." Delaney spoke up, still focused on cleaning the puppies. "The pups need at least 24 hours of observation. They're stable but weak." Of course," Quaid agreed easily. Too easily. "We'll keep them overnight for monitoring, but tomorrow they really must go back to the proper authorities. Protocol, you understand? We wouldn't want to interfere with official channels." Something in his tone made the hair on the back of Harlan's neck stand up. He watched as Quaid reached toward Juniper, noted how she shrank back slightly, though she didn't growl. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes. "I'd like to foster them," Harlan heard himself say. "While things get sorted out, I work for myself, flexible hours, have experience with dogs." Quaid's smile tightened fractionally. "That's very generous, but as I said, there are protocols. The county has first claim on strays, especially ones already in their system. Isn't that right, Delaney? Delaney kept her eyes on her work, her voice neutral. That's the usual. Procedure, yes. Then it's settled, Quaid said. I'll make those calls now. Delaney, please get our guests settled in the recovery ward. Mr. Voss, we can't thank you enough for your help today. Rest assured, they'll be in good hands. Harlan stood his ground, not moving towards the door. I'd like to fill out that fostering paperwork anyway, just in case the county approves it. Something dangerous flashed behind Quaid's professional facade, there and gone so quickly Harlan might have imagined it. But he'd seen enough predators in his life to recognize the look. Whatever was going on here, Juniper wouldn't be safe if she went back to official channels. Of course, Quaid said finally. Delaney can help you with those forms. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some calls to make. As Quaid left the room, Harlan met Juniper's eyes again. She had moved closer to him during the conversation, pressing against his leg while keeping her body between her pups and the door where Quaid had disappeared. Her message was clear. She had chosen him as her protector, and she trusted him to keep that promise. Delaney waited until Quaid's footsteps faded before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. The county shelter has been marking dogs as unadoptable and then losing them. No records, no traces. I've tried reporting it, but nothing ever comes of it. Harlan absorbed this information silently, watching Juniper nurse her pups. The pieces were starting to fit together. The shed, the ledger, the blood, the tattoo. Something ugly was happening in Birchfield, something that went beyond simple neglect or bureaucratic incompetence. What time does the night shift start? He asked quietly. No night shift tonight, Delaney replied, understanding in her eyes. Just the emergency service answering machine after 9 o'clock. Harlan nodded once, scratching Juniper behind her ears. She leaned into his touch, and he felt the weight of her trust, her choice. He had followed her into that yard, and now he couldn't walk away from what he'd found. Not just the evidence of cruelty, but this small family fighting to survive it. I'll be back, he told them softly. It wasn't just words. It was another promise, one he intended to keep no matter what it cost him. The setting sun cast long shadows across the limestone yard as Harlan pulled his wrecker to a stop half a block away. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white with tension. The quiet doubt that had been gnawing at him since leaving the vet clinic had driven him back here, needing answers. Something about Dr. Quaid's insistence on following protocol felt wrong. The way Juniper had shrunk from his touch, the blood in the shed, that cryptic ledger with its codes. None of it added up to simple stray dog management. Harlan slipped out of his truck, boots crunching softly on gravel. The yard looked different in the fading light, more menacing. Shadows stretched between the stacks of limestone blocks, like dark fingers reaching for him. He moved cautiously, staying close to the perimeter fence. The padlock on the shed still hung broken where he'd snapped it earlier. Inside, the empty cages stood like silent witnesses. Harlan pulled out his phone, using its flashlight to examine the area more carefully. The bloodstains he'd noticed before weren't just scattered drops. There were splash patterns on the walls, dark smears on cage bars. His stomach turned as he pictured what might have happened here. These weren't accidents. This was systematic. A sudden crunch of gravel outside made him freeze. Footsteps, at least 2 sets, approaching the shed. Harlan killed his light and pressed himself against the wall beside the door, heart pounding. The footsteps stopped just outside. "Check inside," a gravelly voice ordered. "Make sure he ain't come back snooping." A beam of light swept through the doorway. Harlan held his breath, grateful for the deep shadows where he stood. The flashlight beam passed within inches of his boots. "Clear," a second voice called. but someone's definitely been here. Lock's busted. Yeah, that'd be our curious friend from this morning. The wrecker driver. The first voice sounded annoyed. Harlan could make out their silhouettes now. Two men, one tall and lanky, the other shorter but solidly built. Shame if something happened to his business, the shorter one said. Lots of accidents can happen to a tow truck. Brake lines get old, equipment fails. Boss wants it handled clean, the other replied. Just a friendly warning first. Make sure he understands to leave county game alone. Harlan's jaw clenched. County game. The casual way they said it confirmed his worst suspicions. This wasn't just a few corrupt officials. This was organized. Let's check the back, the tall one said. Maybe leave him a message he can't miss. As their footsteps moved away, Harlan eased toward the door. He had to get out before they circled back. But as he reached the threshold, a third set of footsteps crunched on gravel. Someone coming around the corner of the shed. Harlan reacted purely on instinct. As the new figure appeared in the doorway, he drove his shoulder forward, catching the man in the chest. They both went down hard. Harlan rolled, scrambling to his feet as shouts erupted behind him. There he is! Get him! Harlan ran. He was bigger than most men, but he could move when he had to. Footsteps pounded after him as he weaved between the limestone stacks. A heavy impact between his shoulder blades nearly sent him sprawling. Someone had thrown something. He reached the fence and vaulted it, feeling his jacket tear on the wire top. Landing hard, he sprinted for his truck. Behind him, he heard cursing as his pursuers reached the fence. This is your only warning, one of them shouted after him. Stay out of county business. Harlan's hands shook as he fumbled his key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he pulled away fast enough to leave rubber on the asphalt. In his rearview mirror, he could see 3 figures watching from the fence line. They made no attempt to follow. He drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, making sure no one was tailing him, before finally pulling into an all-night diner on the edge of town. His heart had stopped racing, but the implications of what he'd discovered kept his mind spinning. This wasn't random. The codes in the ledger, the county game they'd mentioned, Juniper's suffering had been deliberate. She wasn't just a stray who'd slipped through the cracks. She'd been part of something bigger, something organized enough to have enforcers watching that yard. The waitress had just set a cup of coffee in front of him when his phone buzzed. A text from Delaney. Can we meet? Found something about those codes? Harlan texted back an affirmative and the diner's address. 20 minutes later, Delaney slid into the booth across from him. She looked worried, glancing around before speaking in a low voice. I checked the shelter's online records after you left, she said. Going back months, none of the animals with letter number codes ever show up in the public listings. Not one. How many are we talking about? Dozens. The intake forms exist. I found those in the paper files. But then they vanish from the system. No adoption records, no euthanasia records, nothing. It's like they cease to exist. Harlan took a long drink of his coffee, remembering the blood stains in the shed. They don't cease to exist, he said quietly. They get redirected. He described what he'd found at the yard and his run-in with the men there. Delaney's face paled. Dr. Quaid's been pushing to handle all shelter consultations personally for the past year, she said. I thought he was just trying to increase business, but... She trailed off, shaking her head. The ledger I found had dates, codes, amounts, Harlan said. Big amounts. Way more than adoption fees. Fight money, Delaney whispered, looking sick. They're using the shelter system to source fighting dogs. The ones that survive training get coded and sold. The ones that don't end up in that shed, Harlan finished. He thought of Juniper's gentle nature, how she'd trusted him despite whatever she'd been through. The idea of someone trying to turn her into a fighter made his blood boil. We have to stop this, Delaney said. But the county animal control chief is in Quaid's pocket. Everyone knows it, but no one can prove it. And now we know why he's never investigated complaints about missing animals. We need that ledger, Harlan said, and we need to keep Juniper and her pups safe until we can expose this. Quaid will have called the chief by now. They'll come for them first thing in the morning. Delaney's fingers worried at her napkin. By official channels, everything will look perfectly legal. Just a stray being returned to county custody. Harlan stared into his coffee cup, seeing Juniper's trusting eyes in his mind. She'd led him to her pups, chosen him as their protector. Those men at the yard had meant their threat, but he'd made a promise too. "How secure is the clinic tonight?" he asked. Delaney pulled out her phone and opened a folder of screenshots. "Look at this. While I was digging through records, I found something interesting. A lot of these vanished dogs were officially transferred to a nonprofit called North Fork Rescues." Harlan leaned forward to look at the documents. "Never heard of them." "That's because they barely exist on paper. Guess who founded it?" Delaney's eyes narrowed. "Dr. Mercer Quaid." "Of course," Harlan muttered. The pieces were falling into place. "Perfect cover. Take dogs from the shelter, claim they're going to a rescue. Then funnel them wherever they want," Delaney finished. "The paperwork looks legitimate enough that no one asks questions. And with Quaid's reputation in town, who'd suspect the beloved local vet?" Harlan's jaw tightened. He thought of the blood-stained concrete in that shed, of Juniper's scared eyes when they'd first met. "We need proof, real proof." Delaney nodded, scrolling through more documents. North Fork's address is listed as a P.O. box. But look at these intake forms. They all have the same routing number for transport fees. I bet if we could trace those payments... "That'd take too long," Harlan said. He pulled out his own phone, bringing up satellite images of the limestone yard. "We know they're using that shed, and if that's where they're holding dogs..." His voice hardened. "I've got a wrecker." Delaney's eyes widened. "You want to break in, after what happened tonight?" "Not break in." Harlan zoomed in on the image. That shed has a metal roof, probably corrugated steel. One good pull with the wrecker's winch. "You'd expose everything inside," Delaney breathed. Then she frowned. "But those men..." "Won't be expecting anyone to come back so soon," Harlan said, "and they sure won't expect a wrecker. Look, you said yourself, we need to keep pressure on Quaid, make this public enough that he can't just make it disappear." Delaney was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, she pulled out her car keys. "I'll bring my phone. Document everything." The limestone yard was dark and silent when they arrived 30 minutes later. Harlan positioned his wrecker carefully, using the shadows of the stacks for cover. The winch cable made a soft whirring sound as it extended. "Ready?" he whispered to Delaney. She nodded, phone camera already recording. The first pull made the roof groan. The second tore it partially free with a screech of protesting metal. The third ripped it completely open, flooding the interior with moonlight. The stench hit them first. Fear, waste, blood. Then came the sounds. Whimpers, growls, the rattle of chain against metal. Delaney's phone light revealed rows of crates stacked 3 high. "Oh, God," she whispered, documenting everything. "There must be 15 dogs in here." Harlan was already moving, pulling crates down carefully. Most of the dogs inside were terrified, pressing themselves against the back of their prisons. A few showed fresh wounds, hastily bandaged. All wore the same ear tattoos as Juniper. "Getting these uploaded now," Delaney said, her voice shaking with anger. "Tagging every animal welfare group I can think of. People need to see this." They worked quickly, freeing dogs and loading them into Delaney's SUV. Many were too weak or scared to resist. Others had to be carried. Harlan's hands were bleeding from the sharp edges of the crates, but he barely noticed. "That's the last one," he said finally, helping a limping pit bull into the vehicle. "We need to move." They were barely back on the main road when Delaney's phone started buzzing. "It's working," she said, scrolling through notifications. "The photos are being shared. Local rescue groups are asking questions. Someone tagged the State Veterinary Board." Harlan nodded grimly. "Good. Let them ask questions. Let them look closer at North Fork and Quaid's operation." "Where are we taking them?" Delaney asked, reaching back to gentle a frightened shepherd who'd started whining. "I know a place," Harlan said. "Old farm outside county lines. Owner owes me for pulling his combine out of a ditch last harvest. He'll keep quiet and give us time to figure out next steps." They drove in tense silence for several miles. Finally, Delaney spoke again. "This is going to get ugly. Quaid won't take this lying down." "No," Harlan agreed. "He won't." He thought of Juniper and her pups, safe for now at the clinic. Thought of these newest rescues, their wounds and terror telling stories of unspeakable cruelty. "But neither will we." Delaney checked her phone again. Shares are over 500 now. Comments demanding investigation. Local news stations being tagged. "The pressure needs to stay on," Harlan said. "No chance for them to bury this or explain it away." He glanced in his rearview mirror at the precious cargo they carried. These dogs deserved better. They all deserved better. The farm appeared ahead, a weathered barn silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. As they turned onto the gravel drive, Delaney reached over and squeezed Harlan's hand. No words were needed. They both understood this was just the beginning. The real fight was still to come. But for now, they had struck their first real blow, exposed the truth to the light. And somewhere in town, Harlan knew, Quaid was about to discover just how much harder it was to hide cruelty when people were finally forced to look. The morning sun had barely risen when the pounding on Harlan's motel door jolted him awake. He'd gotten in late after helping settle the rescued dogs at the farm, his muscles aching from hours of lifting crates and calming frightened animals. The pounding came again, more insistent. "Harlan. Voss, Sheriff's Department, open up!" His heart sank as he opened the door to find 3 deputies, their cruisers parked at angles across the lot. Behind them stood the county animal control chief, his uniform stretched tight across his chest, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the early hour. "Mr. Voss," the chief said, trying to sound authoritative. "We're here about the stolen animals." Harlan's jaw tightened. "Stolen?" "The evidence animals you removed from a secured facility last night." The chief mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "Dr. Quaid reported the theft. Those dogs were part of an ongoing investigation." "Investigation?" Harlan's voice was dangerous and low. "Into what? The abuse they were suffering?" "Sir, step aside," one of the deputies ordered. "We have a warrant to search the premises for the missing animals." Harlan stood his ground. "They're not here, and they're safe now. Somewhere you can't hurt them anymore." The chief's face reddened. "This isn't about hurting animals. This is about interfering with county business. Speaking of which..." He pulled out a document. "We also have orders to retrieve the shepherd mix and her pups from your care. They're county property until properly cleared for adoption." The words hit Harlan like a physical blow. "Juniper? No. She came to me. She chose me." "Juniper?" The chief's laugh was ugly. "Subject Y12 is an unadoptable animal with known aggressive tendencies. She's being returned to proper custody." Harlan's hands curled into fists. One of the deputies noticed and stepped closer, hand on his holster. "Don't make this worse than it is, Mr. Voss." The drive to the veterinary clinic was a blur. Harlan followed the cruisers in his wrecker, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He'd called Delaney on the way, his voice rough as he explained what was happening. "I'll stall them as long as I can," she promised. "But Harlan, Quaid has the county board in his pocket. He's been running this game for years." When they arrived, Quaid was already there, his perfectly pressed lab coat a stark contrast to Harlan's rumpled clothes. The veterinarian's smile was sympathetic, reasonable, and completely false. "Mr. Voss," he said smoothly, "I understand your concern, but these animals need to be properly evaluated before any adoption can be considered. Surely you see that." Inside, Juniper was in one of the clinic's runs. She pressed against the gate when she saw Harlan, whining softly. Her pups tumbled behind her, still wobbly on their feet, but growing stronger every day. "Don't do this," Harlan said quietly, looking at Quaid. "You know what happens to them in the county system." Quaid's smile never wavered. "I know they'll receive appropriate care and placement. That's all any of us want, isn't it?" Delaney appeared in the doorway, her face tight with anger. "Dr. Quaid, I must protest. These animals are still under medical observation. Moving them now could—" "Thank you. Delaney." Quaid cut her off smoothly. "But the county has priority here." "Chief?" The animal control chief stepped forward with a catch pole. Juniper backed away, placing herself between the pole and her pups. Her ears flattened, and a low growl rumbled in her chest. "See?" the chief said. "Aggressive behavior, just like the report said." Harlan moved to intervene, but two deputies blocked his path. He was forced to watch as they cornered Juniper, slipping the loop around her neck despite her struggles. Her pups were scooped up and placed in a carrier, their frightened cries tearing at his heart. "This isn't right," he ground out. "She's not aggressive. She's protecting her babies. She's a good dog." "The county will make that determination," Quaid said firmly. He turned to the chief. "Please ensure they're properly secured at the facility. We don't want any more unfortunate escapes." Harlan watched helplessly as they loaded Juniper and her pups into the animal control truck. She fought the whole way, trying to turn back toward him, her cries mixing with those of her pups. The moment they drove away, something in Harlan's chest seemed to crack open. He hadn't let himself care about anything, or anyone, since losing his wife. Now, watching them take Juniper, he felt that carefully constructed wall crumbling. Delaney found him in the parking lot later, staring at the empty space where the truck had been. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I tried to stop them." "How much power does he have?" Harlan asked, his voice rough. "How deep does this go?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Quaid's been here 20 years. He's on every board, knows every official. The county shelter sends him whatever dogs he wants, no questions asked. Those that don't come back, nobody looks too hard. And now he has Juniper." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "He's sending a message," Delaney said. "After what we did at the limestone yard, he's showing us he can hurt us through the system itself." Harlan turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her step back. "Then we'll have to find a way to hurt him back." "Harlan?" "She trusted me," he cut her off. "Those pups were just starting to thrive. And now—" He shook his head. "I won't let them disappear into his operation, whatever it takes." Delaney touched his arm gently. "We'll figure something out, but we have to be smart. Quaid's already framed you as a thief. If you do anything rash now, he'll have you arrested." The truth of her words did nothing to ease the ache in his chest. Somewhere in the county facility, Juniper was alone, separated from her pups, probably terrified. He'd promised her safety, and he'd failed. "I should have seen this coming," he said quietly. "Should have gotten them somewhere safe, out of his reach." "You couldn't have known how fast he'd move," Delaney assured him. But now we know what we're dealing with, and we'll find a way to fight. Back, legally, to expose what he's really doing." Harlan nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the horizon where the truck had disappeared. The wall he'd built around his heart after his wife died had kept him safe, kept him moving, never staying too long in one place. But Juniper had changed that. She'd chosen him, trusted him, needed him. And now she was gone, taken by a system that called cruelty procedure and torture rehabilitation. The thought of her in their hands made his blood boil. "We'll get them back," he said, as much to himself as to Delaney. "Whatever it takes, we'll get them back." Delaney's fingers flew across her keyboard, her face lit by the glow of her computer screen. It was well past midnight at the veterinary clinic, but she couldn't sleep. Not with Juniper and her pups locked away somewhere in the county system. "There has to be something," she muttered, digging deeper into the North Fork Rescue's financial records she'd managed to access. The numbers didn't add up. They never had. But now, with Harlan's discovery of the ledger and the coded entries, she had new search terms to work with. Her phone buzzed. A text from Harlan. "Any luck?" She'd insisted he go home to rest after the devastating seizure of Juniper and her pups, but she knew he wouldn't be sleeping either. "Maybe," she typed back. "Come to the clinic." 20 minutes later, Harlan's heavy footsteps echoed through the empty building. He looked worse than when she'd last seen him. Dark circles under his eyes, his normally steady hands shaking slightly as he accepted the coffee she offered. "Look at this," Delaney said, turning her screen toward him. "I've been cross-referencing the codes from that ledger with North Fork's payment records. Y12 wasn't just Juniper's identifier, it was her price tag." Harlan leaned in, his expression darkening as he studied the spreadsheet. "What do you mean?" "These regular payments from North Fork to the county shelter. They're coded as adoption fees. But look at the amounts." She pointed to a column of numbers. "No legitimate rescue pays $1,200 per dog. That's not an adoption fee, it's a bribe." "To look the other way when dogs disappear," Harlan growled. "Exactly, but it gets worse." She pulled up another document. "These are payments going out from North Fork to various individuals. The amounts match the codes in the ledger. Y12, $1,200. R8, $800. And look at the names receiving these payments." Harlan squinted at the screen. "I don't recognize any of them." "You wouldn't, but I did some digging." Delaney's voice shook slightly. 3 of these men have prior arrests for dogfighting. 2 more are known associates of fighting rings in neighboring counties. The coffee cup in Harlan's hand creaked dangerously. They were selling them to fighters. Not just selling them, training them, conditioning them. Delaney pulled up a series of photographs. "These are from North Fork's rehabilitation facility, the one they claim helps aggressive dogs become adoptable. Look at the equipment." The images showed what looked like a professional training setup, but there was nothing therapeutic about it. Breaking sticks, heavy chains, treadmills modified with barriers, all standard tools of the dogfighting trade. "That's why Juniper was so desperate to escape," Delaney said softly. "They were preparing her for the ring. The Y in her code probably meant young. She's the right age to start training. And $1,200. That's what they thought they could get for her once she was ready." Harlan pushed away from the desk, pacing the small office. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "So the county animal control chief gets his cut to mark certain dogs as unadoptable or evidence holds. Then they vanish into North Fork's system." Delaney's voice was bitter. "I always wondered why some dogs never showed up on the adoption lists. Now we know. They were never meant to be adopted." "And Quaid runs it all." Harlan stopped pacing, his face a mask of fury. "The respected town vet, the founder of a rescue organization, The perfect cover. He has everyone fooled, Delaney agreed. The shelter staff think they're sending dogs to rehabilitation. The public sees North Fork's glossy success stories, the few dogs they actually do adopt out as a front. Meanwhile, the real money comes from selling dogs to fighters. She pulled up more financial records. Look at these kickbacks. The animal control chief gets $500 per dog he helps disappear. The shelter supervisor gets $300 to falsify records. Even some of the kennel staff are on the payroll. Small amounts, just enough to keep them quiet about odd transfers or missing paperwork. Harlan braced his hands on the desk, studying the evidence of corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for years. "How many dogs?" he asked, his voice rough. "How many have they sold?" Delaney's fingers trembled as she tabulated the numbers. "Based on these payment records, at least 300 in the past 2 years alone." 300. Harlan straightened up, his expression dangerous. 300 dogs sent to fight and die while everyone looked the other way. And now they have Juniper and her pups. Delaney's voice cracked. The only reason they moved so fast to seize them is because she was valuable merchandise that got away. They'll want to recoup their investment. No. Harlan's voice was steel. They won't touch her or those pups, not now that we know the truth. But how do we stop them? Quaid has the law on his side. On paper, everything looks legitimate. North Fork is a registered nonprofit. The county transfers are documented as adoption fees. Then we'll find another way. Harlan pulled out his phone, showing her the photos he'd taken of the ledger before they'd been caught at the limestone yard. "We have proof of their real operation. The coded prices, the payment records, the fighting equipment. We just need to get it to someone who can't be bought." Delaney nodded slowly. "I know a reporter at the state paper who's been trying to crack the dogfighting rings for years. But Harlan..." She met his eyes. "If we do this, Quaid will know it was us. He already suspects we know too much. It's why he moved so fast to take Juniper." "I don't care anymore." Harlan's voice was quiet but determined. 300 dogs, Delaney. 300 souls they traded like baseball cards, sent to fight and suffer and die. And every day we wait, more disappear into their system. She studied him for a long moment. The weary wrecker operator who'd walked into her clinic with a mud-covered shepherd and her pups was gone. In his place stood a man with steel in his spine and righteousness in his heart. "Okay," she said. "Let me make some calls, but first..." She turned back to her computer, fingers flying over the keys. "I'm making copies of everything. Multiple backups stored in different places. If they try to bury this evidence, they'll have to dig a lot of holes." Harlan nodded grimly. "Send me copies, too. And Delaney?" He hesitated. "Thank you. For believing me. For helping." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. 300 dogs, Harlan. Plus Juniper and her pups. Someone has to speak for them. Someone has to make this right. They worked through the night, documenting every connection, every payment, every piece of evidence that proved North Fork Rescues wasn't saving dogs. It was condemning them to hell for profit. And somewhere in the county facility, Juniper waited in her cage, not knowing that her act of trust in a lonely wrecker operator had set in motion the events that would bring down an empire of cruelty. The morning sun cast long shadows across Harlan's wrecker as he methodically installed the last camera. He'd positioned 4 of them strategically, 1 on the front bumper, 2 along the sides, and now this final one with a perfect view of the rear approach. Each lens was carefully concealed within the truck's existing hardware, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, threading wires through the frame while his mind churned over everything they'd discovered. The numbers still haunted him. 300 dogs lost to Quaid's operation. 300 souls traded away like commodities, their fates sealed by nothing more than greed. The phone in his pocket buzzed. Delaney. "Got through to the state investigator," she said without preamble. "Her name's Marina Torres. She's been building cases against dogfighting rings for 15 years, but she's never been able to crack the supply chain. When I told her about the shelter connection, she nearly jumped through the phone." Harlan secured the final camera mount. "She believe us?" "The payment records convinced her. She's driving down tomorrow to meet us in person. Says she needs to see everything we've got before she can move officially. Tomorrow might be too late for Juniper and the pups." Harlan's voice was tight. "That's why we're doing this today." "I know." Delaney paused. "You sure about this plan? If Quaid catches on?" "He won't." Harlan checked the camera feed on his phone, adjusting the angle slightly. The breakdown call came from a burner phone. The contact name is someone passing through from 3 counties over. On paper, it looks completely legitimate. "And you're sure they're doing a transfer today?" "According to the schedule you found, they move dogs from the limestone yard to the county facility every Thursday afternoon. Makes sense. Fewer people around, easier to hide what they're doing." He stepped back, surveying his work. "Once we have video of them actually moving the fighting dogs, Torres will have what she needs to move in." "Okay." Delaney took a deep breath. "I'm heading to the clinic now. Quaid's got appointments all morning, but he always disappears around 2 o'clock on Thursdays. I'll text when he leaves." "Be careful," Harlan said. "Don't let him suspect anything's different." "I've been hiding what I know for weeks. I can manage a few more hours." Her voice softened. "You be careful too. These people hurt dogs for money, Harlan. They won't hesitate to hurt you if they catch on." "I know." He thought of Juniper's trusting eyes, the way she'd led him to her pups that first day. "But someone has to stop them." After hanging up, Harlan ran through final checks on all 4 cameras. The feeds came through clear and steady on his phone. He'd positioned them to catch approaches from every angle, making sure nothing could happen around his truck without being recorded. The plan was simple, but risky. He'd called in a breakdown at the limestone yard, saying his truck had blown a tire and he needed a tow. The location would force Quaid's transport team to either cancel their regular transfer or try to work around him. Either way, the cameras would catch whatever they did. Hours crept by. Harlan kept himself busy with small maintenance tasks, always staying within sight of his truck. Around 1:30, his phone buzzed with Delaney's text. "Q just canceled last 2 appointments. Getting ready to leave." Harlan's pulse quickened. Right on schedule. He positioned himself under the truck's hood, pretending to check the engine. The cameras gave him a perfect view of both access roads. At 2:15, a white van turned onto the gravel drive. No markings, tinted windows. It slowed when the driver spotted Harlan's wrecker blocking the path to the storage sheds. The van stopped. 2 men got out, both wearing North Fork Rescue polos, looking official and professional. But Harlan recognized one of them from the night he'd been jumped here. His knuckles whitened on the wrench he was holding. "Having trouble?" the first man called out, friendly enough. Harlan straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, blew the right rear tire. Waiting on a tow, should be here soon." The men exchanged looks. "That's rough," the second one said. "Mind if we get past? We've got some equipment to pick up from the storage shed." "Sorry." Harlan gestured at his truck. "Can't move it without that tire. Shouldn't be too much longer, though." More significant looks between the men. The first one pulled out his phone, stepping away to make a call. Harlan pretended to return to his engine work, but he kept them in his peripheral vision. The cameras caught everything. 10 minutes later, another vehicle approached, a black SUV that Harlan recognized as Quaid's. The veterinarian stepped out, all polished concern and professional courtesy. "Mr. Voss," he said smoothly, "what an unexpected pleasure. Having some trouble? Just waiting on a tow?" Harlan straightened again, meeting Quaid's eyes. Shouldn't be too much longer. Oh, I think it might be. Quaid's smile didn't reach his eyes. You see, I own this property, and I'm starting to think it's no coincidence you keep turning up here. Just bad luck with the tire. Harlan shrugged. Like I said, I'll be gone as soon as my tow arrives. I'm afraid I can't wait that long. I have some rather time-sensitive business to conduct. Quaid's voice hardened. So I'm going to have to insist you move your truck. Now. Can't move it without that tire. Harlan kept his voice neutral. Unless you've got a spare that'll fit. Quaid stepped closer, dropping his voice. Listen carefully, Mr. Voss. I've been patient with your interference. I even let it slide when you stole those dogs from my property. But my patience has limits. Move the truck, or things will become very unpleasant very quickly. That a threat, Doc? Simply a statement of fact. Quaid smiled again, cold and sharp. You're blocking a private drive on private property. I'd be well within my rights to have you forcibly removed. As if on cue, the two men in North Fork polos moved to flank Quaid. Harlan noted their positions, keeping his expression neutral even as his muscles tensed. Seems like an awful lot of fuss over some storage sheds, he said mildly. Must be something pretty important in there. Quaid's eyes narrowed. My business is none of your concern. Last chance, Mr. Voss. Move the truck. Harlan made a show of considering it, then shook his head. Sorry, Doc. Like I said, can't move it without that tire. But hey, feel free to call the sheriff. I'm sure he'd be real interested in what's so urgent in those sheds that can't wait an hour. The tension crackled between them. Harlan could see Quaid weighing his options, trying to decide if Harlan was bluffing or if he really knew something. The cameras caught every micro-expression, every tell that showed the respected veterinarian's mask slipping. Finally, Quaid stepped back. Fine, we'll wait. He turned to his men. Stay with him. Make sure there are no more accidents. He returned to his SUV, pulling out his phone as he went. Harlan caught fragments of his conversation. Have to postpone security issue. Tomorrow instead. The two men took up positions on either side of the truck, not even pretending to be friendly anymore. Harlan returned to his fake engine work, carefully keeping them in view. Hours crawled by. The sun wheeled overhead. No one moved. Finally, just before sunset, a legitimate tow truck arrived. Harlan made a show of relief, letting them hook up his wrecker. As they pulled away, he caught one final glimpse of Quaid's face in his rearview mirror, frustrated, angry, but trying to hide it behind that professional smile. Back at his garage, Harlan immediately began downloading the camera footage. His phone buzzed with a text from Delaney. Torres will be here at 8 a.m. tomorrow. You get anything good? He reviewed the footage. Crystal clear video of Quaid and his men, their reactions to being blocked from the storage sheds, the barely concealed threats. Most importantly, their desperation to make their delivery on schedule. Got everything, he texted back. Proof they're moving dogs through there regularly, plus Quaid himself getting nervous about delays. Good. A pause, then. Checked county records. Jay and Pups still there, marked as evidence holds. They're safe for now. Harlan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had bought another day for Juniper and her pups. Tomorrow they would show Torres everything they'd gathered. The payment records, the coded ledger, and now this video proof of suspicious activity at the limestone yard. He finished backing up the footage to multiple drives, just as Delaney had done with the financial records. If Quaid wanted to bury this evidence, he'd have to dig very deep indeed. Dawn painted the limestone yard in shades of gray as Harlan positioned his wrecker near the storage sheds. The hidden cameras were perfectly aligned, 3 angles covering the main loading area. He'd spent hours getting the placement just right, making sure they'd catch everything. Movement at the gate, Delaney's voice crackled through his phone. She was parked down the road, watching through binoculars. 2 vehicles, white van and Quaid's SUV. Harlan's chest tightened. Right on schedule. He ducked behind a stack of pallets, heart pounding against his ribs. The cameras were rolling, catching everything. The white van backed up to the largest shed. 3 men in North Fork polos emerged, followed by Quaid himself. They moved with practiced efficiency, unlocking the heavy door and sliding it up. The sound of dogs barking echoed across the yard. "Getting all this?" Delaney whispered through the phone. "Crystal clear," Harlan responded, watching the feed on his phone screen. "They're moving crates." The men worked quickly, loading large metal crates into the van. Through the camera feed, Harlan could see the distinctive letter number codes painted on the sides, more proof of their operation. Quaid stood back, supervising and checking something off on a clipboard. His face was clearly visible in the morning light, perfect for identification. Everything was going according to plan, until it wasn't. One of the men paused, staring at something above the door. He reached up, touching the small black lens barely visible in the shadows. "Boss," he called out, "we got a problem." Harlan's blood ran cold. Quaid strode over, examining the camera. His face transformed from confusion to rage in an instant. "Find them," he shouted. "They have to be close." The men scattered, searching the yard. Harlan pressed himself deeper into the shadows behind the pallets. His phone buzzed, Delaney texting, "Get out now." But it was too late. A shout went up as one of the men spotted him. Harlan burst from his hiding spot, running toward the shed's side door. If he could just get to the other side of the building. Something caught his foot. He sprawled forward, hitting the concrete hard. Boots surrounded him. Rough hands dragged him up and shoved him into the shed. "Well, well," Quaid's voice dripped with false pleasantry. "Mr. Voss, I should have known." "Got another one," a man's voice called from outside. Harlan's heart sank as they pushed Delaney through the door. She had tried to help him, gotten too close. "Ms. Whitlow, too?" Quaid clicked his tongue. "I'm disappointed. You were such a promising employee." "Go to hell," Delaney spat. One of the men was tearing down the cameras, throwing them to the ground. Another was gathering papers, stuffing them into a bag. Harlan could smell something sharp and chemical, solvent from the drums lined against the wall. "What should we do with them?" one of the men asked. Quaid studied them coldly. "We can't let this continue. Make it look like an accident. These old buildings, so many hazardous materials." He turned to leave. "Clean this up. Thoroughly." The men started pouring solvent around the shed's perimeter. Harlan struggled against the hands holding him, but they had him pinned. Beside him, Delaney was fighting just as hard. Then everything happened at once. Someone kicked over one of the drums. Solvent splashed across the floor, reaching toward an old space heater in the corner. A spark. A whoosh of ignition. The fire spread with terrifying speed, racing along the chemical trail. Heat blast hit them like a wall. The men holding them let go, running for the door. Harlan grabbed Delaney's arm, pulling her away from the flames, but they were already surrounded. Smoke filled the air, thick and toxic. They dropped to their knees, trying to stay below it. The fire roared, feeding on the chemicals. Wood crackled. Metal groaned. "The back door!" Harlan shouted over the noise, pointing, but a burning beam crashed down, blocking their path. The heat was unbearable now, searing their lungs with every breath. And an explosion rocked the shed. Another drum catching fire. The force threw them both to the ground. Harlan's head cracked against the concrete. Through blurring vision, he saw Delaney sprawled beside him, coughing violently. The smoke was everywhere now, choking them. Harlan could barely see, barely think. The fire pressed in closer, hungry and merciless. His last thought before consciousness started to fade was of Juniper. He had failed her, failed them all. Another explosion shook the building. The roof creaked ominously above them. Through the smoke and flames, death was coming for them both, and there was nowhere left to run. The heat pressed in like a living thing, hungry and cruel. Harlan's vision swam as smoke filled his lungs. Above him, a burning beam had pinned his leg to the concrete floor. Each breath was agony. Beside him, Delaney lay unconscious, her face streaked with soot. This was it, he thought. After everything, the fights, the revelations, trying to save those dogs, this was how it would end. The irony felt bitter in his throat. Or maybe that was just the smoke. He'd finally found something worth fighting for, only to fail when it mattered most. Through the roar of flames, a familiar sound cut through. Barking. Sharp, insistent barking. Harlan turned his head, squinting through the smoke. There, in one of the crates they'd been loading, a shape moved. A loud crack, then the distinct sound of metal giving way. "Juniper?" he croaked. The shepherd mix burst from her broken crate, amber eyes reflecting the flames. She bounded toward him, surprisingly steady despite the chaos. Her fur was singed, but determination radiated from every movement. "Get out," he tried to wave her away. "Go." Instead, she pressed close, whining urgently. Her nose nudged his hand, then turned toward something behind him. Through wavering vision, Harlan followed her gaze. His tow cable, still attached to his belt from earlier, had fallen nearby. Understanding hit him like a splash of cold water. The cable, the beam. "Maybe." Juniper barked again, sharper this time. The sound seemed to clear his head. With trembling hands, Harlan grabbed the cable, fingers fumbling with the hook. The dog kept barking, the sound guiding him through the thickening smoke. "Good girl," he gasped, voice raw. Keep going." He looped the cable around the beam, muscles screaming with the effort. Juniper's barks grew more urgent as another explosion rocked the building. Sparks rained down around them. The cable secured, Harlan pulled with everything he had left. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the beam shifted. Just enough. He yanked his leg free, biting back a cry of pain. Juniper was already moving, pushing against his shoulder, urging him up. The dog's strength surprised him as she helped him find his feet. His leg nearly buckled, but determination drove him forward. Delaney, he remembered suddenly. Stumbling, he reached for her still form. Together, he and Juniper dragged Delaney toward the back of the shed. The smoke was almost solid now, but Juniper seemed to know where she was going. She led them to a partially blocked door, their last chance. Harlan gathered his remaining strength and kicked. Once, twice. The door shuddered but held. Behind them, the roof groaned ominously. Juniper barked, the sound desperate now. With a final adrenaline-fueled kick, the door burst open. Fresh air rushed in, sweet as life itself. Harlan pulled Delaney through, Juniper right beside them. But the dog suddenly turned back, darting into the inferno. "Juniper!" Harlan shouted. She emerged moments later, dragging another crate by its wire door. Inside, two terrified dogs huddled together. Without hesitation, Harlan grabbed the crate, hauling it out. Juniper disappeared again, returning with one more. They had barely cleared the building when a deafening crack split the air. The roof caved in, sending a geyser of sparks toward the sky. The force of it knocked them all forward onto the grass. Harlan rolled onto his back, gasping in clean air. Beside him, Delaney stirred, coughing. Juniper pressed against his side, her fur sooty, but her eyes bright with triumph. The rescued dogs whimpered in their crates, but they were alive. They were all alive. Looking at the shepherd mix who had saved them, Harlan felt something shift in his chest. This dog, who they'd all seen as a victim to be saved, had just proven herself a hero. She'd faced the flames without hesitation, not just to save herself, but to save them all. "Good girl," he whispered hoarsely, reaching out to touch her head. "The best girl." Juniper's tail wagged once, and she licked his sooty hand. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing closer. But for this moment, in the grass behind the burning building, Harlan simply held on to the dog who had given him back his life. And his purpose. The wail of sirens grew closer, cutting through the crackle of flames. Harlan held Juniper close as red and blue lights flooded the limestone yard. First responders poured in, followed by a silver sedan that pulled up sharply. A woman in a dark suit stepped out, badge glinting. "State Investigator Sarah Chen," she announced, surveying the scene. "I got your message, Mr. Voss, and it seems I arrived just in time." Delaney, now sitting up and wrapped in a shock blanket, pulled out her phone. "The footage. It should have uploaded automatically from Harlan's dash cam." The investigator nodded, already checking her tablet. "We've got it. Clear video of the men loading those crates and their reaction when they spotted your camera. That's assault and attempted murder now, on top of everything else." Harlan watched as emergency crews worked to contain the blaze. "There's more," he said hoarsely. "The ledger. Right here." Delaney pulled a folder from her bag, protected in a plastic sleeve. "Payment records, coded entries for dogs, kickbacks to animal control, and these," she handed over another stack of papers, "are the bank statements showing money flowing between North Fork rescues and known dog-fighting operations." Investigator Chen's eyes narrowed as she flipped through the documents. "This is exactly what we needed. Dr. Quaid's been on our radar, but we could never get enough evidence to stick. With these records and your footage..." She looked up at the burning building, then back to Harlan and Delaney. "His whole operation's about to come down." Flashing lights pierced the dawn as police vehicles surrounded North Fork rescues. Dr. Mercer Quaid stood in his doorway, his carefully maintained facade crumbling as officers approached with warrant in hand. His pristine white coat couldn't hide the trembling in his hands. "Dr. Mercer Quaid," Investigator Chen announced, "you're under arrest for multiple felony counts of animal cruelty, racketeering, and conspiracy." The sight of handcuffs clicking around Quaid's wrists made Harlan's throat tight. Across the parking lot, the county animal control chief tried to slip away through a back door, but two officers were already waiting. His uniform, usually stretched tight with self-importance, now seemed to hang loose as they cuffed him. "You can't do this," the chief sputtered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'm a county official." "That makes it worse," Chen replied coldly. "You used your position to facilitate animal abuse for profit." Harlan watched from his wrecker as police let out boxes of evidence. Computer drives, documents, burner phones, the whole operation laid bare. Juniper pressed against his leg, and he knelt to scratch behind her ears. "Look at that," he murmured to her. "Sometimes the good guys win after all." The morning sun caught the officers' badges as they led Quaid and the chief to separate patrol cars. Their reign of cruelty was over, brought down by a stray dog who refused to give up, and the people who chose to listen to her. 2 weeks after the raid, Harlan stood in the county courthouse signing adoption papers for Juniper and her pups. His hands trembled slightly as he wrote his name. It felt bigger than just taking in some dogs. For the first time since losing his wife, he was choosing to put down roots. "Congratulations," the clerk said, stamping the papers. "They're officially yours." Back at his apartment, Juniper's tail thumped against the floor as she watched him unpack boxes. He'd canceled his long-haul contracts and rented a small house with a fenced yard on the outskirts of Birchfield. The pups tumbled over each other, playing with packing paper. "You really think she's got what it takes?" Harlan asked Delaney, who was sorting through training equipment on his kitchen counter. She smiled, watching Juniper alert to a sound outside. "Her intelligence, her drive to help, she's perfect for search and rescue work. We'll start with basic obedience next week." Harlan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on his shoulders. The house keys felt right in his pocket. Juniper padded over and leaned against his leg, looking up at him with those knowing amber eyes. He reached down to scratch her ears, no longer just a passing stranger but her person, her home. Delaney stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. "Welcome home, Harlan." In that moment, surrounded by boxes and dog toys, with Delaney's warm presence beside him, Harlan knew he'd found more than just a place to stay. He'd found where he belonged. That evening, after Delaney left, Harlan sat at his kitchen table with a small velvet box from the pet store. Inside gleamed a heart-shaped silver tag, catching the warm light from his lamp. He'd spent nearly an hour choosing it, wanting something special to mark this new beginning. Juniper sat patiently as he fastened the tag to her collar. The metal clinked softly against her rabies vaccination tag, covering the stark Y12 tattoo in her ear. Her new tag read Juniper Voss, with his address and phone number etched beneath. "There you go, girl," he said softly, running his fingers through her fur. "You're not a number anymore. You're family." The pups dozed in their bed nearby, peaceful and secure. Harlan remembered finding them in that dirty drain, how their rescue had cracked open something in his heart he'd thought was sealed forever. Now, watching Juniper inspect her new tag in the fading daylight, he saw more than just a dog. He saw his partner, his reason for staying put. His phone buzzed with a text from Delaney. "Training gear's all set for Monday. Coffee first?" Harlan smiled, typing back, "Wouldn't miss it." The prospect of morning coffee with Delaney, followed by training sessions with Juniper, filled him with quiet joy. After years of watching towns disappear in his rearview mirror, he was finally building something lasting. Juniper rested her head on his knee, her amber eyes full of trust. The same eyes that had drawn him away from his lonely routine at that gas station now anchored him to this new life. He wasn't just a wrecker operator anymore, passing through other people's stories. He was Juniper's person, Delaney's partner in their budding search and rescue program, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at home. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul